few examples, okay? What war stopped women from being treated as second-class citizens? What conflict gave people of non-white ethnic groups their right to be treated as human at all? And which particular firefight gave homosexuals and lesbians their ability to adopt and marry? You see, ladies and gentlemen, it's not the armies of this world which is the conduit for our rights. The very notion is actually quite oxymoronic, since what do you see happen to civil liberties when the military is deployed? We see an encroachment of them, not a creation and or enforcement of them. But of course, the regular dated argument comes out, oh, if it wasn't for the military, then Hitler would have dominated the world and we'd all speak in German right now. Well, yes, granted, the military served the function of taking down a severely despotic, bigoted, homicidal individual, just like, I don't know, other individuals throughout history. And, and thus the armies they had indoctrinated. However, that reason alone is not a justification for using militaristic force outright. Individuals such as Adolf Hitler are reflective of the environment that we, yes, that's right, we endorse, create, maintain and perpetuate. As long as we create the conditions for war, we will create war criminals. The solution to the problem lies not in the violent means we can manifest to cut down the inevitable results of the twisted values we have, but in addressing the root causality and using a rational thought process to align with optimal and altruistic values that don't create Adolf Hitlers in the first place. Anyway, question 3. There really is no such thing as natural laws. There are only scientific hypotheses that stand until disproven, and then they are replaced by another totally subjective human hypothesis, and this is how science progresses. And if someone comes along and says, from this day forth there shall be no more opinions, because all truths are now known and cannot be argued with, not only would he be talking total nonsense, but scientific progress would stop dead in its tracks, and the world would be forever governed by abstract laws that are divorced from concrete reality. And I think that would be lost. It would be more lost and just the progress of science. I think that the human spirit would be crushed. Okay, well, the scientific method doesn't rely on the subjective human hypothesis, as you put it, otherwise known as opinion. It's based on what can be empirically shown at that point in time. The key word is hypothesis. An opinion is a stance, that isn't based on facts. But granted, both opinion and hypothesis are both temporal, but hypothesis is based on fact at that point in time. When it comes to the supposition that there aren't any natural laws, I suppose that could be a semantic issue depending on your frame of reference. How exactly do you define a natural law? As far as I can understand of your question here, I think you may be conflating the natural laws themselves and the means by which we explain and quantify them. I mean, by all means, we're not advocating the position of saying no more opinions because we know everything. No, that will never be the case, because this universe is always changing, thus knowledge is emerging. I agree with you completely on the supposition that putting an end to the search and progression of hypotheses will cause science to stop. Absolutely, I agree with you there 100%. It's like one of the flawed arguments that's levelled at scientists sometimes. The whole but science doesn't and can't ever know everything, to which I would reply to say that even if it could, then science would in fact stop. The very existence of science and its perpetual search for what can be empirically shown is a sign that there are no final frontiers. When it comes to the stance of opinion, I've exhaustively covered that in my previous Q&A shows, so if you wish to understand more about my stance on opinion, then I'd suggest you seek those out. Okay, question 4. So then it becomes a purely resource-based economy. What's to stop the US from simply glassing Iran to seize control of their oil? Bombs and guns are very effective resources to take what resources you want, and if you're planning on a worldwide collapse, I hope you have plans to stockpile guns and know how to make bombs. How do you plan to account for the criminal elements who will have handguns that will rob you and your community and leave you for dead? Okay, well, first off, I should address the fact that you've framed this question in the context that a transition to an RBE has occurred, and for argument's sake, we have the necessary conditions in society and our values that can be closely attributed to the kinds of societal constructs that we advocate. Now, with that in mind, there is already a few flaws in your question here. Firstly, who's to say that we would still have the separatist notions such as countries? Now, that supposition can prove very foreign to people, no pun intended. Of course, there will be certain areas which are different geographically, different climate, etc., but that doesn't correlate to the mentality by which the borders of the constituent countries of the world were drawn. Without the monetary, political, religious dictate, the boundaries of differing geographical areas will be drawn scientifically. An example will be the optimal area for a particular resource which is being used by any settlement, I don't know, such as tidal power. You know, it's not optimal, for example, for that energy generated to be used by infrastructure which is far inland. Now, the notion of country also dictates a stratification ideal in terms of a controlled restriction of the resources and such within that territory. And as society has progressed, we've somehow developed an ego stratification as well. I mean, an example would be when, you know, an American teacher asked their class, "What's the greatest country in the world?" To which their class are taught to respond with, USA! Well, one of the many, many wonderful and insightful things I learned from Jacques Fresco is that the best way to answer that question is to say that if you haven't travelled all over the world, then you can't answer that question. Remember when, as a child, your mum would encourage you to try new foods with the question, "If you've never tried it, how do you know you don't like it?" Strange that that same logic doesn't apply to nationalism. Well, in fact, the logic is actually inverse to the notions of nationalism. But anyway. Okay, second, so the second part of the question here, why would anyone be bombing anyone else in a world where we have grown to understand we are all on this planet together sharing its resources? As I've explained extensively in previous podcasts and my other material, we are intricately linked on this planet. We cannot expect to harm other living souls and not inevitably harm ourselves. Now, this isn't necessarily a karma notion. It's a causality formality. An act of aggression towards another will never wield an overall positive result. The reason why the notion of war isn't as widely questioned and scrutinized is because of our conditioning to only concern ourselves with the short term. The value system shift that is required in order for our species' sustainability presupposes that we are one singular family that needs to altruistically coexist on this planet and complement each other. Only then can this entire biosphere, including ourselves, because we're part of it, function optimally and sustainably. And third, who's to say that we would still be using the archaic and obsolete practice of burning fossil deposits for energy needs? Now, I don't think I need to harp on about the truly abundant means we have of being able to generate energy. I mean, as a very good showcase of what is possible, even just on this front, I would strongly recommend Douglas Millet's short film called Our Technical Reality. It's for free to view on YouTube. Go look it up. It's not that long. It's about 40 minutes or so. I would also recommend his numerous presentations on technology and sustainability and innovation. You know, he's got some wonderful stuff out there. You know, go look it up, man. But anyway, as for the latter part of your question about guns, yes, guns can be very effective, I suppose, if you don't care about the repercussions further down the line and or don't care about the kind of danger you'd be putting yourself in by using such methods. American culture in particular are extremely susceptible to the temptation of guns and the feeling of power that comes with them, mainly because of the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution and what that has been bastardized into. Originally, the Second Amendment states the following: a well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state and the right of the people to keep and bear arms, shall not be infringed. Now, obviously this implies the right to self-defense, right? However, as time has progressed, the vague nature of the language used has granted room for a hell of a lot of misinterpretation and corruption of this principle. For example, at the time this was written, being 1791, the level of arms were not really that advanced. I mean, the flintlock family of rifles was probably the most advanced weapon, even being used by the military at the time. So as you can imagine, the language of the Second Amendment didn't have a grave influence on how we would perceive it through generational time. But as time went on, as weapons technology developed further and further, and society became increasingly obsessed with defense, we now find ourselves with the following paraphrasing of the Second Amendment. The people can have whatever weapons they like and kill whoever they want, because guns and everything that happens with them makes boatloads of money. Because the thing is, I dare say, even when the US Congress passed this amendment, they probably didn't envision that we would have nuclear weapons capabilities within 150 years, and depleted uranium, chemical, viral, and nanotech weapons within 200 years. And the Second Amendment is used to justify the keeping and using of these ultra-destructive instruments. Yeah, it's great if you're American, or even English. Fill your boots if that's the case. Just watch out if you're not. The Western war machine may just have to relieve you of your pea shooters while having a warhead pointed at you. Wow, how civilized we are. Anyway, sorry for that tangent. You've asked if we're planning on a global collapse. We don't need to orchestrate that. The inherent logic of the current system has collapse at the end result of its process. Yeah, that's how the monetary system works. And you hope we plan on stockpiling guns and making bombs? Tell you what, if you discovered you had cancer and chemotherapy would provide curative results, as chemo has been shown for quite a few forms of cancer, would you prefer to carry on doing nothing while you slowly die, or would you choose to take the chemo, which would actually benefit you and save you? Now, just as a side note, for those of you listening who are aware of certain criminalities of certain elements of the medical industry and pharmaceutical industry, I'm aware as well, fully aware, and I wholeheartedly support the uncovering of all these corruptions. I tell people about this stuff all the time. However, the oncology industry is thankfully not completely corrupted. Certain chemo treatments are actually extremely beneficial for a lot of patients. Now, back to the point. Would you prefer to go down with your ignorance and pig-headedness, or would you prefer to take the chemo and that actually pulls you back from that precipice, and you're then alive to make the more humanitarian and logical choice for yourself and humanity? That's how I perceive the transition to an RBE. It is desperate